Okay, guys, going to get started in just a sec here. I would love it if you guys could turn your cameras on, and I can give you participation as well as counting you present for today. Just reminding you. Let me go ahead and go over to our agenda here. Let's see what's going on. Oop, I forgot something. I want to share sound. Just a sec here. There we go. Okay, we do have a Newsella article posted today. Okay, it's actually about kind of healthy lifestyles and eating stuff, which is, I think, certainly an issue for me. I get less out of my what I try to keep as healthy routines with eating. I just ate a huge Chipotle instead of a nice low-fat meal and a Greek yogurt like I normally would on a normal school day, and that happens a lot. So yeah, give that a close read. Do the number 1 through 4 quiz like we usually do. All right, routine stuff. Otherwise, grammar. Lesson 15 is due by tonight. Watch that video, get that done if you haven't already. Vocabulary lesson 15 is due by tomorrow night, and we've done 13, 14, and 15 on the new quarter, which means next week we will be doing a vocab test. I'll go over that later, but let's remember, there's no reason every one of you shouldn't be getting full credit 100% on tests, because all you have to do is complete it on time, which is an issue for a lot of people in this situation, and then do the corrections on time, and you get 20 out of 20, 20 out of 20, you got 40 test points. So don't forget that when that comes up. Checking my chat here. Can't see the Google Cloud. Oh, are you guys not seeing my agenda? Well, everything I said still counts. Seeing my home screen. Why does that happen sometimes? That is so odd. Let me try that again. It happens when I try to share sound. Thank you for telling me that. Can you see my agenda now? Okay, second try works. Why is that? Makes no sense. All right, letting Elias in. Cool. Thanks, Logan. All right, so anyway, we are looking at literature and finally getting going on that. Now, before I get into that, let me just give you another reminder. I still got plenty of people who haven't turned in the outline. Now, I've got some other stuff I'm grading, so the grading of that is kind of on the back burner. But what I've been doing is I'm keeping a 0 in there for everyone who has not turned it in, because a 0 is a 0, and you need to see what that's going to do to your grade. So if there's anybody else since my last update, or since I graded it essentially, who has actually turned the outline in, obviously, you know, to beat a dead horse here, you need to email me and let me know you've turned it in, and then I will at least remove that 0, and it'll just be blank until I actually get those graded. It's just as well, because I would rather have all or most of them in before I grade them. I can give them back and talk about them all at once before we do the final draft, the real paper, which obviously is going to happen this quarter. And then, assuming we're still having our end of course test, late March, early April, then the rest of the quarter we'll practice at least a couple times on timed writings, because we need to use our skills that we've learned from writing a couple full papers to be able to do it on the spot for a couple different types of writing prompts. Okay, but for today, literature. So you were asked to have looked at the introduction for the short story Marigolds yesterday, and to have filled in the fill in the blanks based on that at the top of the Access handout that I have, with my new method, copied and pasted into an assignment for you. I'm not checking that yet. I was just trying to get you going, because we can't do everything in class. So hopefully you have done that. Today we're going to read into the story. That's why I have the audio on for my screen share, and possibly have an assignment to finish. I think the extent of that assignment, since the story is a little bit longer, is to begin annotating the story. We have an annotation guide built into that. So let me show you the assignment that I have on Google Classroom first. So it says Marigold's Access Document Activities. And notice, in addition to the Access doc, I've got the annotation color codes, okay? So when you annotate the story, you can use this, which reminds you that general textual evidence, you highlight yellow, red used to note a question, something you don't understand, green for some place that you feel like you have some connection with. I get that, I've been through something like that, and purple for any vocab words that maybe aren't already explained, or, you know, maybe they are, maybe you're reading and you highlight it, but then you look at your at your access doc and you see what they mean. Okay, so nothing's wrong when you annotate. Okay, there's no wrong way to do it unless you don't try or don't use multiple colors. I'm not going to check you really carefully on that, but I do want to see that there's a bunch of highlights, and I'll give you an easy way to kind of guide you through. Okay, so this up here, you should have already done this. Here we just have a couple glossaries of vocab words. So some of the ones you might have questions about as you read might be listed here and given definitions. Down here is the annotation guide. Now, this is a whole bunch of information. Let me try to zoom in a little bit here. But it's not a whole lot of work, okay? These are just guidelines for you to have some ideas of what you might highlight. Highlight sentences you have questions about. Highlight one about something you already know. Highlight key characters. A character's introduced or something. Highlight that. Highlight key events. Highlight vocab words. Highlight additional unfamiliar vocabulary. Highlight 2 examples that show how Elizabeth reacts to the setting and her actions. Okay, no wrong way to do it, but that gives you some ideas. So use that. And then finally down here is the sync TV chart, but we are definitely not to that yet. That is after we finish the story, obviously. Okay, no need to go there yet yourself. I'm going to switch over to Study Sync here and actually bring up the assignment. Here it is. So you should have already taken a look at this. Eugenia Collier's powerful shorts, excuse me, powerful short story Marigolds. Elizabeth, the narrator, tells a story from her childhood. So that means it's in first-person point of view, right? In a dusty Depression-era town, which means it's in the 1930s and probably most likely in some part of the Dust Bowl. Confused and amused by why the town outcast, Miss Lottie, puts so much care into the brilliantly colored patch of marigolds outside her crumbling gray shack, Elizabeth and her friends tease the old woman and throw rocks at her flowers. Sounds like a pretty mean thing they do for some reason. A later incident in the garden causes Elizabeth great shame, leads to a deeper moral understanding and a major change in life. Okay, hopefully you already watched that video. Fill those in. So we go to tab 2, and here is the story. Okay, so notice here, when you go back, that you want to have the annotation button on. I can't do it here because this is just a preview. So that enables you to highlight and color, you know, which is what we mean when we say annotate the story. I think it's good to turn on the numbers so you can see the paragraph numbers, so you can easily, or I can easily reference different paragraph numbers. And then when I turn on this audio here, we'll have a storyteller built into the assignment here that'll start reading. So I'm going to try to zoom in one more time and give you a good view. If that's not somehow working for you, I'll give you just a sec here. And if you want to just open your own study sync, look at it from there, but just listen to me without any grid or anything in your way, then you can also do that. So let me give you just a sec to do that. I'm going to pour myself a little coffee. And then we'll read part of the story. So I wouldn't try necessarily, I mean, you could, you don't necessarily need to feel the need to annotate while we read. It might be a little bit difficult. You can if you want. But otherwise, I will note on the agenda how many paragraphs we read since they are numbered, and you guys can go back and annotate after class, or if I stop class with time left in our bell. I don't think I'll go all 35 minutes today. Let's say we started at 55, which means we go till 12:30, right, Mr. Page? Yeah, Miss Lehman's fancy map of the schedule over there. Okay, so we have 25 minutes from now. I'm not going to read for 25 minutes, but we'll read for a little while. And the story has 64 paragraphs. So we'll spend a couple or 3 days on this. Take our time. Okay, hopefully everybody's ready. I'm going to turn on the audio and go.
When I think of the hometown of my youth, all that I seem to remember is dust. The brown, crumbly dust of late summer. Arid, sterile dust that gets into the eyes and makes them water, gets into the throat and between the toes of bare brown feet.
Just to point out an example, you might be able to tell from the context, but I bet you anything arid is a vocab word that maybe not all of you know. Example, something that can be highlighted for purple, right?
I don't know why I should remember only the dust. Surely there must have been lush green lawns and paved streets under leafy shade trees somewhere in town. But memory is an abstract painting. It does not present things as they are, but rather as they feel. And so when I think of that time and that place, I remember only the dry September of the dirt roads and grassless yards of the shanty town where I lived. And one other thing I remember, another incongruency of memory, a brilliant splash of sunny yellow against the dust. Miss Lottie's marigolds.
Pausing just for a sec there in case you do want to, maybe it would be a good idea to kind of highlight as we go. Do we know what the word abstract means? Do you relate to part of this? Highlight in green. Okay, moving on. Paragraph 2.
Whenever the memory of those marigolds flashes across my mind, a strange nostalgia comes with it and remains long after the picture is faded. I feel again the chaotic emotions of adolescence, elusive as smoke, yet as real as the potted geranium before me now. Joy and rage and wild animal gladness and shame become tangled together in the multicolored skein of 14 going on 15 as I recall that devastating moment when I was suddenly more woman than child, years ago in Miss Lottie's yard. I think of those marigolds at the strangest times. I remember them vividly now as I desperately pass away the time.
So you might be able to tell that we're kind of slowly creeping up on what's eventually going to be a flashback, right? Because she's making these vague, kind of ambiguous references to Miss Lottie's marigolds, but she hasn't really told us what the deal is with those, right? We know from the preview, but that's not part of the story here yet. So I almost kind of gave us a spoiler there, right? But I see the word sky in here. I wonder if some of you guys know what that means. And that seems to be kind of tangled together with some sort of poetic device, right? Some kind of metaphor going on there that has to do with her coming of age, right? 14 and 15, and she mentions suddenly more woman than child. You know, maybe that's something that some of us can relate to, even if you're a guy, right? Like just like getting around the time in your life when am I a boy or a man? You know, kind of making that transformation. Paragraph 3.
I suppose that futile waiting was the sorrowful background music of our impoverished little community when I was young. The depression that gripped the nation was no new thing to us, for the black workers of rural Maryland had always been depressed. I don't know what it was that we were waiting for, certainly not for the prosperity that was just around the corner. For those were white folks' words, which we never believed. Nor did we wait for hard work and thrift to pay off in shining success, as the American dream promised, for we knew better than that, too. Perhaps we waited for a miracle, amorphous in concept, but necessary if one were to have the grit to rise before dawn each day and labor in the white man's vineyard until after dark, or to wander about in the September dust, offering one's sweat in return for some meager share of bread. But God was chary with miracles in those days, and so we waited. And waited.
Definitely some kind of tricky vocabulary in there. A lot of description. And you might notice that we are not yet to the part of the story where it's actually telling the story, right? What are we still in here? Who remembers the terms from that plot curve that you always learn in English classes that eventually leads up to the climax and then the following action and resolution? What does it start with when the setting and the characters are still being introduced and described? Any of you guys know that word? Feel free to put it in the chat or speak up. Before the rising action, Tammy, that's pretty close. That's what will come right after what I'm talking about, okay? So it's definitely part of that curve. That's the majority of the story, of any story, is going to be the rising action because the climax is toward the end. But what's before the rising action, before we really even get into that? Because right here, what she's describing is it's just how things are, right? She's describing what the setting's like, what it was like, where and when she grew up, who was there, what's that called? Yes, good job, Canny. Exposition. When the setting and the characters are established. So we're still in that. The story has, you can tell it's a longer story because there's a lot of exposition. Okay.
We children, of course, were only vaguely aware of the
Paragraph 4. Just keeping you on track.
extent of our poverty. Having no radios, few newspapers, and no magazines, we were somewhat unaware of the world outside our community. Nowadays, we would be called culturally deprived, and people would write books and hold conferences about us. In those days, everybody we knew was just as hungry and ill-clad as we were. Poverty was the cage in which we were all trapped, and our hatred of it was still the vague, undirected restlessness of the zoo-bred flamingo who knows that nature created him to fly free. As I think of those days, I feel most poignantly the tag end of summer, the bright, dry times when we began to have a sense of shortening days and the imminence of the cold.
I finished this paragraph 5. Notice that this author, it's a prose short story, right? It's fiction, it's not poetry, but this writer definitely uses a lot of like creative comparisons, similes, and metaphors to kind of bring to life different things, right? Poverty was the cage. Got a metaphor there, right? In which we were all trapped. And our hatred of it was still the vague, undirected restlessness of the zoo-bred flamingo who knows that nature created him to fly free. That's quite a creative comparison. So if you're seeing those things that are going on and you want to like highlight them because you have questions about them, that's one thing to do. So keep that in mind. Paragraph 6.
By the time I was 14, my brother Joey and I were the only children left at our house, the older ones having left home for early marriage or the lure of the city, and the 2 babies having been sent to relatives who might care for them better than we. Joey was 3 years younger than I, and a boy, and therefore vastly inferior. Each morning our mother and father trudged wearily down the dirt road and around the bend, she to her domestic job, he to his daily, unsuccessful quest for work. After our few chores around the tumble-down shanty, Joey and I were free to run wild in the sun with other children similarly situated. For the most part, those days are ill-defined in my memory, running together and combining like a fresh watercolor painting left out in the rain. I remember squatting in the road drawing a picture in the dust, a picture which Joey gleefully erased with one sweep of his dirty foot. I remember fishing for minnows in a muddy creek and watching sadly as they eluded my cupped hands while Joey laughed uproariously. And I remember that year, a strange restlessness of body and of spirit, a feeling that something old and familiar was ending, and something unknown and therefore terrifying was beginning.
That sounds like a pretty important line, doesn't it? And I remember, so she goes through kind of like a series of disconnected memories, right? And then she says, and I remember that year, a strange restlessness of body and spirit, a feeling that something old and familiar was ending and something unknown and therefore terrifying was beginning. So what is ending and what's beginning, and why is that terrifying? That's probably a good question we want to ask ourselves as the story moves forward. Now, at the next paragraph that starts with one day returns to me with special clarity. Perhaps it was the beginning of the experience and in some inexplicable way marked the end of innocence. I was loafing under the great oak tree. Okay, now what are we into now? We're moving past the exposition and we're into what? Chat or voice, guys? What can we tell is starting here? What part of the plot? Now we're into the rising action. Cami is on this today. Thank you, Cami. Okay, here we go.
One day returns to me with special clarity for some reason, perhaps because it was the beginning of the experience that, in some inexplicable way, marked the end of innocence. I was loafing under the great oak tree in our yard, deep in some reverie which I have now forgotten, except that it involved some secret thoughts of one of the Harris boys across the yard. Joey and a bunch of kids were bored now with the old tire suspended from an oak limb, which had kept them entertained for a while.
Is that how you guys keep yourselves entertained at home? You got a tire hanging from a tree branch, right? Probably not, right? Different times. You guys are on YouTube the whole day.
"Hey, Elizabeth," Joey yelled. He never talked when he could yell. "Hey, Elizabeth, let's go somewhere." I came reluctantly from my private world. Where you want to go, what you want to do. The truth was that we were becoming tired of the formlessness of our summer days. The idleness whose prospect had seemed so beautiful during the busy days of spring now had degenerated to an almost desperate effort to fill up the empty midday hours. "Let's go see can we find some locusts on the hill," someone suggested. Joey was scornful. "Ain't no more locusts there. Y'all got 'em all while they was still green." The argument that followed was brief and not really worth the effort. Hunting locust trees wasn't fun anymore by now. "Tell you what," said Joey finally, his eyes sparkling. "Let's us go over to Miss Lottie's." The idea caught on at once, for annoying Miss Lottie was always fun. I was still child enough to scamper along with the group over rickety fences and through bushes that tore our already raggedy clothes back to where Miss Lottie lived. I think now that we must have made a tragicomic spectacle. 5 or 6 kids of different ages, each of us clad in only one garment. The girls in faded dresses that were too long or too short, the boys in patchy pants, their sweaty brown chests gleaming in the hot sun. A little cloud of dust followed our thin legs and bare feet as we tramped over the barren land. When Miss Lottie's house came into view, we
Okay. I'm just going to pause for a sec in case you're annotating. Now they're actually coming to Miss Lottie's house.
stopped, ostensibly to plan our strategy, but actually to reinforce our courage. Miss Lottie's house was the most ramshackle of all our ramshackle homes. The sun and rain had long since faded its rickety frame siding from white to a sullen gray. The boards themselves seemed to remain upright not from being nailed together, but rather from leaning together, like a house that a child might have constructed from cards. A brisk wind might have blown it down, and the fact that it was still standing implied a kind of enchantment that was stronger than the elements. There it stood, and as far as I know, is standing yet. A gray, rotting thing with no porch, no shutters, no steps, set on a cramped lot with no grass, not even any weeds, a monument to decay. In front of the house, in a squeaky rocking chair, sat Miss Lottie's son, John Burke, completing the impression of decay. John Burke was what was known as queer-headed. Black and ageless, he sat rocking day in and day out in a mindless stupor, lulled by the monotonous squeak-squawk of the chair. A battered hat atop his shaggy head shaded him from the sun.
Okay, so it's kind of a strange way of putting it, but if you're not getting it from the context, John Burke is being described by them as mentally disabled, right?
Usually, John Burke was totally unaware of everything outside his quiet dream world. But if you disturbed him, if you intruded upon his fantasies, he would become enraged, strike out at you, and curse at you in some strange enchanted language which only he could understand. We children made a game of thinking of ways to disturb John Burke and then to elude his violent retribution. But our real fun and our real fear lay in Miss Lottie herself. Miss Lottie seemed to be at least 100 years old. Her big frame still held traces of the tall, powerful woman she must have been in youth, although it was now bent and drawn. Her smooth skin was a dark reddish brown, and her face had Indian-like features and the stern stoicism that one associates with Indian faces. Miss Lottie didn't like intruders either, especially children. She never left her yard, and nobody ever visited her. We never knew how she managed those necessities which depend on human interaction, how she ate, for example, or even whether she ate. When we were tiny children, we thought Miss Lottie was a witch, and we made up tales that we half believed ourselves about her exploits. We were far too sophisticated now, of course, to believe the witch nonsense. But old fears have a way of clinging like cobwebs, and so when we sighted the tumble-down shack, we had to stop to reinforce our nerves. "Look, there she is," I whispered, forgetting that Miss Lottie could not possibly have heard me from that distance. "She's fooling with them crazy flowers."
Okay, so they're finally there. They're telling each other, okay, there she is. Now, with this description of Miss Lottie, her house, what her son's like, does it sound like someone who's like, you know, ripe or at all deserving of having something really mean, or destructive done to them, like it sounds like it's going to happen here. It really doesn't, right? So it makes you think, why would kids go and pick on a person like this? It seems like kind of a strange subject for a story, but you can tell by the way she's telling it, that she has some regrets about this, about what exactly is going to happen. We kind of know, right, from the preview, if you paid attention. But I think that is a good place to stop. So we have done, it's 60 something paragraphs. So we've done the first 20 paragraphs, and there's no questions yet. Okay, so you don't have to do the quiz or the sync TV or anything like that. We'll get to that eventually. But I would like, what I would like for you to do, as you can probably guess if you weren't doing it already, is to finish annotating the first 20 paragraphs. Okay, we'll kind of do this in chunks. So I think I'm just going to let you go. There's not really a reason to keep you here while you do that. It's not like I need to watch you or anything. So let me come off the screen share. You guys all still there? Yes. Okay. Let me take one last look at who is here. Can someone answer Crystal's question in the chat while I do a little attendance thing here? Someone's been waiting to get in. I don't know who it is. 12:40, I believe, is right, because 12:30 this class ends. We have a 10-minute break. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, guys. Okay, I have everybody else has been here. Feel free to leave. I've got one person, MS2 9HI. I'd like to find out who you are, because I am supposed to have a new student starting, and I'm wondering if it's that person. So everybody else, finish up annotating that section. You still technically have like 7-8 minutes left of class. Shouldn't take you that long. Get your grammar lesson done by tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for coming.
Sorry I was late, Mr. Cooney.
What's that?
Sorry I was late. I got the times mixed up.
Oh, that's okay. I think it's a good idea to maybe write out or print out, the Wednesday schedule, since it's different each those other times. Just like put it up as a poster or something.
Okay. You have a good day, sir.
You too. Thanks. MS2H91, is that Don Travis? Don Travis? I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but I'm wondering if that's you.
Tay Love.
Oh, that's there. It's okay. Okay, gotcha. Well, I want to count you present. Okay, so you might not know the Wednesday schedule today. Remember, the Wednesday schedule is different from other days. Okay, this is recorded, so if you came in late, you can always go back and watch it. I'll have it posted underneath today's agenda. And everybody else, that's it. Thanks for coming. See you soon. Elias, you doing okay? So Luke, you still there?